really exciting live stream with Claire. We're gonna attempt to do it in less than 1 hour. Let's see what happens. So I'll say something about myself that might be useful. I'm a Muslim and I'm trying to make Islam more accessible, and I'm doing that by breaking it down into useful things that you can benefit from, even if you're not Muslim, like all sorts of lifestyle things, from relationships to helping the environment, all sorts of existential questions, all the things that affect your happiness. And I talk about it from a psychological, scientific point of view, as well as referencing the Quran, of course. Then we've got our regular Claire, our revolutionary who wants to get everybody to follow Islamic laws. She's
While
quite
protecting their freedom of belief.
sure. Yeah, don't be too scared of Islamic laws. Maybe that's what you're saying. Um, and yeah, and so what part of our longs, one of my aims that I've made very clear with Claire, I'm trying to get her to convert to Islam. Um, and so through our different discussions, that's one of the aims. And it's not a tribalistic thing. I think I'm not like, oh, it'd be really good if I, get another convert or something. We've got plenty of converts in Islam, God, thank God. But it's all about I see the beautiful values in Islam, and I think Claire does already, and just helping her cross that bridge. Let's see. And so part of that process today is we have lots of chats on WhatsApp, and I didn't actually tell her, but she didn't mind. She's realized now that I've been copy pasting her comments in WhatsApp, and some of them I've been paraphrasing in my own words as well. And we're going to go through them. So the topic today is proving God exists and why God matters. So let's just jump into it. I'll read this. God matters. This is Claire. God matters if he exists. We will not know for certain if he actually exists until we're dead. If we die and that's the end of us with no afterlife, we have been tricked. So I'll make a. Is that something you said? I suppose. Does that sound like
I
you?
admit to it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And so let's talk about. There's two parts to that. There's God existing, God mattering. That's kind of like the whole topic of today in one go. So very briefly, does God exist? Proof God exists. So God existing should be the default. That's one thing I'm going to say. Like we know, you see a phone, you see anything else, you know it had a mate. Even in my wallet, doesn't look particularly complicated, but somebody stitched it together. That should be the default. But it's a strange thing I have to say nowadays because there's so much propaganda to confuse people. Do you think that it's actually possible not to have a creator? So that's my first comment. Any thoughts about it shouldn't be a struggle to believe in God because that should be the default. What do you think about that?
Well, I think we've gone through this chain of reasoning, which is that we are here because there was a creation. Because there was a creation, there must have been a creator, and that creator must have been the Abrahamic God who has communicated with humanity twice through his through the Torah and the Quran. So
Okay,
that would
so
be, yes, an
okay, and
argument
by
for
the
God's
way,
existence.
Muslims would say not twice, thousands and thousands of times. Like even the teachings to the Aboriginals or the people of the Amazon rainforest, the Quran says that all people of all times have been sent a message, and they all have very similar teachings about one God and things. So it's not just twice. But without defining what God is, we like whatever sensible idea of God is. How do you feel about the idea that it should be considered a default because that's all our experience tells us. Anything complicated or any clever functionality with clever functionality, as humans certainly have, we should believe there is a God because that sounds sensible. I mean, does that sound sensible to you?
Well, I would say that. if we accept that there was a creation, then we can easily make the inference that there must have been a creator.
Cool. So I think you agree there. Okay. And then the second point is, and this is another thing to sort of crack the propaganda, is we're given the impression that it's scientific not to believe in God, which is exact opposite, but it's a ton of propaganda to confuse us. So the greatest scientists believe in God, Einstein, Newton, whoever, right? And even scientific laws tell us God must exist. So you've got, without getting complicated, I would just say there's this thing called second law of thermodynamics. That sounds complicated already, but it says something really it says something really simple. Okay, and it says things naturally go from organized to disorganized unless there's some sort of intervention, some sort of intelligence. So
The entropy,
entropy.
the law of
That's
entropy,
right.
yes.
So let's say you've got a sandcastle, you made a lot of effort to make the sandcastle. If you leave it for a month, you wouldn't expect it to become a better sandcastle when you get back. You would expect the wind to blow it, a seagull to jump on top of it, the water to, something's bad's going to happen. By default, it's going to get worse, not better. And so that's science. But what we're told as a theory by supposedly by Darwin, even Darwin didn't quite really make it up. Loads of other people had these ideas that there's a form of evolution. By the way, evolution, I believe in, just means things change over time. As part of the Quran as well. The very definition of the God in the Quran, in the second verse, or some people call it the first verse, called Rub, means the Lord who creates in stages. So it's totally in line with science. Evolution is totally in line with Quranic teachings, although unfortunately lots of how do I describe it, people who really don't know any better, who are top YouTubers of preaching Islam, don't even understand that. But anyway, that's one of the many things I have to do correcting all the time. But in short, there's science says by default things fall apart, and then there's a go on.
Reversion to the mean is also another expression.
Oh, what's that phrase? Say again. Maybe I don't know it.
Reversion to the mean.
Oh, yeah, sounds.
It will go back to in its chaotic state if you don't maintain it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, exactly. That's a cool way of putting it. So yeah, things fall apart by default, but we're told this fanciful idea that if you leave things alone for a long time, they slowly develop into more and more complex things. This is a theory. It's called the theory of evolution, Darwin's theory. And as we learn more about science, we learn more and more that it's completely wrong. And so people will go, oh, is science telling us it's wrong? Actually, I'll just give you one example. So last year, they realized they're looking at the evolution of, or the so-called random mutations of how plants develop, and they realized it's not random. There are certain parts of their genome that stays the same, their chromosomes, whatever, and certain parts that don't. And the parts that stay the same are the core functions, and the parts that change are the parts that need to change to adapt to environment. So but it should be kind of common sense that there's nothing random about biology, okay, because it's such a precise tool. Everything about us is incredibly precise. So how do you feel about that? The science actually tells us that God does exist.
Well, I suppose for certain people, if they're determined to deny it, they'll deny it. And
but are you denying it? I'm talking to you especially.
I'm very firm about my agnosticism, because I need to make the point that whether or not God exists, we have to follow some moral system.
But that's a different. We'll get to that. You've made that. I've got that comment of yours later on, but I want to focus on But at the same time, I'm going to remind myself that this is a long process. I'm going to wear you out slowly over a year, and hopefully you agree with me eventually. But just focusing on the God bit, science. From the things I've said, I don't know. Does it? Okay, let's start with this. But I'm not going to stick on it too much because it will become a 2-hour stream again. So, did you understand that some of the greatest scientists were God believers in God? What do you think about that? I mean, does that influence your idea that maybe God does exist?
Well, I would make the point, if I was arguing for God's existence, is that because atheists and Muslims are agreed about the Big Bang. There is a verse in the Quran that describes the Big Bang, isn't
Yes,
there?
there is. Yeah.
So if you're going to be asking questions, you know, as a scientist or even as a child, it's like, well, you know, what caused the Big Bang? And I would say that theists would have an advantage over atheists because God is not detectable by scientific instruments, but you can make the inference that if there has been a creation, there must have been a creator.
Okay, so you believe in God then?
I'm finding that the arguments are very convenient and very persuasive, and
Would
because I am
you say they're
promoting.
more plausible than no God?
Well, there are people who argue that the universe was
Don't worry
always
about people.
there.
I'm worried about you.
All right, but I have to
Okay, go on.
use
Sorry, go on,
arguments
go on.
that
Yeah.
people have used. I mean, you know, and consider them. That there will be two arguments that, you know, the universe was always there and doesn't need a creator, or it was created. And then you know the questions of for what purpose and that sort of thing, and I'm saying for our social and political purposes, we ought to follow a moral system that is superior to humanity. So if we accept that man was a creation of God, then we already implicitly accept that, you know, God is immortal, we are not, he is perfect, we are not, in theory anyway, and therefore we should obey his laws because he knows and we don't, and he'll live on while, you know, after we are dead. So it kind of makes it easier for people to accept certain laws because, you know, if I made a whole bunch of laws and then it was obeyed during my lifetime and then, you know, I popped off, people will say, well, she's gone. We can do things in a different
So
way
that's
now,
the
can't
reason.
we?
Okay, I will get to that. So why is it beneficial to listen to a God-made law? But yeah, I'm trying to kind of focusing on tiny chunks of this thing, especially focusing on the how we know that God exists. So what do you? Okay, and then the last part of that thing that I said about the randomness, like I said that there's a theory that says, you know, through random accidents over loads of time, we can actually create more and more complex things. But science, actual laws, the law of thermodynamics, the second law of thermodynamics, with law, if people don't know the difference between law and theory, law means, yeah, we know it. Theory is just an idea. We're not sure about it. So there's a law of thermodynamics that says things fall apart over time, and there's a theory of evolution, and I do believe in evolution, but not random evolution, but God-guided evolution. Okay, so there's a theory of Darwinian evolution which says the opposite of the law of science, you know, the law of thermodynamics. So do you get that science says God exists?
I'm not quite sure I understand your
Okay, so the
reasoning.
reasoning is there's a law in science that says things tend to fall apart unless you've got intelligence there in intervening. Okay, so you can see things have not fallen apart. You've got an incredibly complex Earth with, you know, all sorts of life support systems. The more we study them, even if you look at within ourselves, everything is so incredibly complicated. So things seem to be going in the opposite direction of what this law says, which can only lead to the conclusion that the reason why things are not falling apart as they should, or rather than actually they formed into all sorts of complex systems, is because there is a God, because that's the only conclusion. If, like, say you, or I'm not sure, was that, what did you understand by that? I could give a more simpler example.
I'm afraid I don't really understand your. I don't have a background in
That's
science.
fine. That's fine.
So,
If I said there's a sandcastle, and I left the sandcastle and came back in a year, and I had a sand city, like it just got more and more complicated. How do you think that would have happened? Do you think it could have happened by itself, by accident?
well, yes, I would assume that there were things to make it develop
What were the
and all
things? Were the
that.
human beings some sort of intelligence, or do you think the water, the rain could have done that?
You're saying the sandcastle actually became a sand
Yeah, it
city?
became
Is that
way
is that
more
what you're saying?
complicated, and even yeah, it started off simple and got more complicated.
Well, I suppose I would say that the sand has a life of its own.
Really? You'd believe that? He's like, yeah, the sand did it. The sand did it to itself. It just grew. You believe that? You
Well, if a sandcastle became a sand city, something must have made
yeah.
it. Unless I see, creatures, maybe crabs or whatever,
So my
and then
guess would have
I
been
would.
it would have been a bunch of human beings, very skillful human beings. That would be the
Yes.
most. Would you say that would be the most reasonable one, rather than some sort of sand? The sand itself became alive and did it, like in real life. I'm talking about. Would the most reasonable conclusion would be a bunch of human beings got together and made the sand city. It didn't just happen by itself.
There are just so many things that kind of give me cognitive dissonance,
Yeah,
chief of which, the injunction not to build your house on sand. So
yeah,
I suppose I get into difficulties about imagining. So okay, the sand castle became a sand city, and it's this big thing that houses humans. I suppose I was thinking of the termite man, the way you were
hmm.
talking. Uh, um, so, obviously termites or ants, make their own nests, and
Yeah, and they've
they
got some sort of built-in intelligence to do that.
yes, the will to survive, and perpetuate
Well,
itself.
yeah, and somebody taught them architecture. It's, the more you study these things, they're very complex things. They have all sorts of. I used to be a big fan of this kind of stuff when I was a kid, when there were nothing else to do, and I think they have all sorts of ventilation systems, very clever, and beehives are even way more clever than that. But anyway, and the point is that God is not this kind of sort of dead God that needs to be found by us, but God is constantly, making us aware of himself, subtle ways and more complex ways. So subtle ways is that God gives you a conscience. Um, and talks to you that way. And a lot of people can see those subtle ways. It's like, oh, there was a lesson there. Oh, I did something bad and something bad happened. And you got this inner voice, and it's like, what's this inner voice telling me? That's a subtle way. But the more obvious way, I think you mentioned a minute ago, was like you got things like the Quran coming with these impossible things, like telling you the Big Bang happened, and loads of other scientific truths. It's like, how did this book know all this stuff? Must be from the creator, because nobody else knew at that time. So there's all sorts of ways that God is making himself very evident, that he's there. And on top of that, in the Quran itself, it doesn't just say here's some scientific stuff. It actually says you make a deal or an intention to listen to me, and I will respond in many, many ways, and I'll make it very obvious that I am here. So there's a verse of the Holy Quran. I'll just read it out. Let me scroll in the right way. I've got it on the other screen. So it goes, oh, doesn't highlight in one go, never mind. So, and when my servant asks thee or you about me, So that's sort of talking to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And when my servant asks you about me, say, I am near. I answer the prayer of the supplicant when he prays to me, so that they should, all this old English I forgot to retranslate, so they should listen to me and believe in me, and that they may follow the right way. So there's a purpose to this guidance. And so when my servants, so these people have got an intention to listen to God. So God guides everybody in different ways, like I said, in subtle ways. But if you're, willing to listen to God, then God will treat you better than people who don't care about God or too arrogant to listen to God, the creator who's given them everything. So what do you think about that? Any thoughts about, God is always guiding us. God gives a promise that he will guide us and things like that. Any thoughts about that?
I'm reminded of a verse in the New Testament, actually, and it goes along the lines of knock and it shall be opened, ask and you shall receive, something
Yeah.
like that. So basically, it's God saying all you have to do is ask, and obviously, if you ask, then you are acknowledging my existence.
Yeah. Cool. I agree. Yeah. And if you really want to be listened and be favored and given more attention, it makes sense that God should distinguish between people who want to listen to God and people who don't. So the people who don't, you know, um, they get less guidance, and I think it's fair, especially if they don't really care what God says in the first place. And yeah, so if you basically, in short, if you're really interested, God's giving you a challenge here. So it's like, yeah, you want to be useful, you want to listen to me, and obviously listening to God is a good idea because God just wants good stuff for you. Then here's a promise, just ask, pray, as it says, and have the intention of listening to God and see what happens. And if it doesn't, then you can say God doesn't exist, I suppose. But yeah, any thoughts about that?
I was thinking that even if God doesn't exist, this whole idea of having a relationship with God, which is a conversation with God, and usually these conversations are about, asking for stuff. I mean, it's not usually, oh, thank you, God, you made me so, rich and pretty and clever and fortunate. It's usually, I want this thing, and then once you get into this conversation, it will be then you have to kind of bargain with God and say, well, I deserve this thing that I want because I've been a good girl. Or I know I haven't been a good girl, but I still deserve it because I'm going to be a good girl in the future. Something, and I think even this conversation has the effect of um, increasing taqwa,
Yeah. Taqwa, do you want to explain what that is?
consciousness of God.
Yeah, good. Self, yeah, what's it? It's self-analysis as well. Self-awareness when you're doing something wrong, being very careful about the subtleties of the wrong things you do. So yeah. So yeah, so you're saying even if you don't believe in God, you have to it makes the conversation with this potentially non-existent God, makes you maybe articulate some of like what you want, and then it makes you also question if you deserve it. And so that conversation is healthy. Is that what you're basically saying?
Yes, it gives you focus because I think prayers should be drafted like terms of a contract. You want this thing, you have to kind of visualize you getting it, and obviously it can't be some miracle or whatever. You can go through the list of things that it could happen naturally. You know, um,
Oh, I haven't been looking at
as
the chat. I'm so bad. I pressed the wrong button. I was on the wrong mode. There's loads of comments.
really.
Yeah,
Oh, that's nice to know.
yeah. I
Uh,
mean, it's Alika who usually I don't want to say troll. That's not very nice. Okay, so but maybe She is trolling from the first comment. Okay, so I'll look at that in a second. So your first thing, your WhatsApp message said God matters if he exists. So we talked exist a bit. And then there was like, oh, what about if there's no afterlife? And a lot of people have the impression that you can't prove that there's an afterlife. And so there's all sorts of ways of explaining it. The Quran gives lots of evidence as to why we should realize there must be an afterlife. But I think I will tell a story which is actually reflected in something the Quran says, but not actually the story directly from the Quran. There's a guy called Dr. Wayne Dyer. Ever heard of him?
No.
Yeah. Anyway, he's got a nice story. So I'll read that, and then we'll jump to we'll try to whiz through some of the comments. So, the parable of the womb, you can Google it at some point if you want. It's on the internet. And let's go for it. So here goes the story. In a mother's womb, there were two babies, and this should, by the way, help you realize there must be an afterlife to some extent. In a mother's womb, there were two babies. One asked the other, "Do you believe in life after delivery?" The other replied, "Why, of course. There has to be something after delivery. Maybe we are here to prepare ourselves for what we will be later." "Nonsense," said the first. "There is no life after delivery. What kind of life would that be?" The second said, "I don't know, but there will be more light than here. Maybe we will walk with our legs and eat with our mouths. Maybe we will have other senses that we can't understand now." The first replied, "That is absurd. Walking is impossible. And eating with our mouths? Ridiculous. The umbilical cord supplies nutrition and everything we need. But the umbilical cord is so short. Life after delivery is to be logically excluded. So you can't walk around with an umbilical cord stuck, to your mum. I think is what he's saying. The second insisted, "Well, I think there is something, and maybe it's different than it's here. Maybe we don't need this physical cord anymore." The first replied, "Nonsense. And moreover, if there is life, then why has no one ever come back from there? Delivery is the end of life. And in the after delivery, there is nothing but darkness and silence and oblivion. It takes us nowhere." "Well, I don't know," said the second, "but we will meet Mother, and she will take care of us." The first replied, "Mother? You actually believe in Mother? That's laughable. If Mother exists, then where is she now?" The second said, "She is all around us. We are surrounded by her. We are of her. It is in her that we live. Without her, this world would not and could not exist." So said the first, "Well, I don't see her, so it's only logical that she doesn't exist." To which the second replied, "Sometimes when you're in silence and you focus and you really listen, you can perceive her presence and you can hear her loving voice calling down above." That's it. So you can take all sorts of things from that, but I think one of the reasons why this story is very much in line with the Quran is the words that describe God, the two key qualities of God. They're called Rahman and Rahim, the most gracious and merciful. Those are very poor translations of a complex word, but they're related to the word Rehem or Rehema, something which basically means womb. So God is the womb, essentially the life support system that supplies all our needs. So anyway, that was a little story. Did you take anything from it?
Well, it reminded me of a novel called Flatland. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Nope.
By Edwin Abbott.
Okay.
Which is actually I think you're a maths teacher, aren't you? So the idea is that there was a world in the first dimension and a world in the second dimension, and obviously the person, the individual, the character existing in the first dimension would have no idea of the second dimension until he was went there, and then the second dimension, I didn't have any idea until he went into the third dimension. And I think yes, I imagined that there will be lots of experiences that we won't know about.
Okay, yeah. So from your answer, I do realize that there's a lot of limitations to this story, and I'm going to explain it a bit closer to the Islamic idea. So, and then hopefully, maybe the idea of an afterlife is a lot more plausible. Basically, what it is that first of all, the afterlife is just a continuation of life, a higher form of life. Now, how do we know reasonably that that will happen? It's because it's already happened twice. So you might be thinking, well, at least from our scientific understanding, it's happened twice. You might be wondering, what afterlife has happened twice? So when we were a sperm, before we met the egg, the sperm effectively has to die, and an essence of it continues to form a higher form of existence. So from the perspective of the sperm, it dies, and it's got a very short and low level of existence, and that low level of existence dies and feeds into the beginning of a higher form of existence, which, the cells which eventually become a baby within the womb. So do you follow so far in what I'm saying, that there's been one death?
It makes me think of
Sorry?
an insect going through its life stages of metamorphosis.
Yeah, but do you get that from what we think of in this life as death? Okay, I'm saying is not really death. It's just, or maybe you have understood what I'm saying by saying metamorphosis, which is changing of form, isn't it? So yeah, so you get that you can have a thing that looks like death, and we've seen this scientifically, that it looks like death from one perspective, from the lower perspective, but from the higher form of life, which is the baby within the womb, compared to the sperm. It's actually the beginning of life, of a new life form. So that's one. And then again, happens a second time, and it could have happened many other times before that. But a second time is when the baby is delivered. That also is actually a form of death for the baby, from the baby's perspective, because you have to cut off its life support system, which is the cord, and it has to leave the universe, and it actually temporarily almost not dies, but it has to the systems that were keeping it alive within the womb are shut down, and new systems are started up, like the lungs, for example. They start being used for the first time in the new life outside the womb. So can you see that from a lower perspective of life, you keep having, not once but twice scientifically, a death of a lower life form leading to life of a higher life form? Does that make any sense?
Yes, and yes, clearly I have no memory of how things felt when I was a sperm, and then when I was a fetus, and yes, and very little memory of how I was. Well, no memory of at all of how I was as an infant.
But you don't have to actually have, even if you've lost the memory of when you were a sperm. We know scientifically that is the case, that it happens.
Yes, you certainly can't deny it.
So, I mean, does that help you in conceiving or believing that maybe there is an afterlife because we're just following the pattern that has already preceded us.
Yes, you've explained
Thank
it
you.
very well.
So that's one, and then there's a third evidence the Quran gives, and it's basically it gives the conscience, and this is a very subtle idea, and I think as materialists we're not very good with subtle things, but it says the conscience itself is evidence of a day of judgment, which effectively is evidence of an afterlife. So why is that? So a conscience is this universal set of rules that psychologists admit to and agree on. They know it's there, and we all know it's there from practical experience. Okay, and the question would be, what is this inbuilt set of rules? Now, from a materialistic point of view, we kind of ignore it. But if we realized, oh, we've been provided a program, a computer program that seems to tell us very similar rules between all of ourselves, why have we been, and if we keep with the logical conclusion that there's a God and a creator, that means we've been provided with this set of rules, and we have to we're punished by ourselves, by our conscience, when we don't follow those rules, but we've given enough freedom to ignore it as well. These rules call your conscience. So there's something telling us what to do, and what is the purpose of this conscience? Is to guide us in the right direction so we pass the exam of life, and then we're going to be marked on the day of judgment. So this, in a very subtle way, this conscience is evidence that there is an afterlife and there will be a day of judgment. Any thoughts about that?
I suppose you could argue, if you're an atheist, saying, well, there's always a right and wrong way of doing things, and obviously when we get things wrong, we get upset with ourselves.
Why should we? Because, like, for example, let's say you rob a bank. Okay.
There's a right and wrong way of robbing a bank, isn't it?
But anyway, let's say you rob a bank and you thought, yeah, I got off scot-free, but your conscience really, and this is accepted, when you do anything bad, you will punish yourself. You won't enjoy all that money. You'd be like, I want to celebrate, and this really annoying conscience is giving me a hard time. Can you stop, please? But you won't be able to stop it. So yeah. I mean, what do you think about that? This weird set of rules that keep punishing you. And as I say, psychologists have accepted this strange thing. So it's not just a religious idea.
Well, it's still right and wrong, though, isn't it? I mean, I've asked a friend, like, I remember this conversation, and I got quite cross with him because, because it entered him because I was insisting it's rules, and he was saying,
"What is the conscience?" Yeah.
Yes. So and I said, look, there is a difference between public morality and private morality. So public morality is always enforced by law, and private morality is a matter of conscience. And some people would get very upset if they broke the law and they feel guilty and maybe feel impelled to confess their crimes. And there are people who just don't care and are happy they got away with it. So there will be some people who. So I'm saying that different people have different sensitivities, shall we say, about. For their conscience.
And by the way, atheists don't know what's right and wrong. They're just totally confused by it. There's nothing you can actually define as right and wrong without God's help. And so you can talk about murder. Is right murder, wrong and right? You can just go through any example and you won't be able to define it. So despite atheists not knowing what's right and wrong logically, and as a whole, it's not a very long discussion, but maybe it's hard to conceive of because it's kind of Anyway, it's very easy to prove that atheists cannot define right and wrong. You can see right now people don't even know what a woman is at the moment. Um, so it's very
Yes,
easy to
yes,
prove that.
yes.
But despite that, they have a conscience which does tell them what's right and wrong to some extent. Yeah. So yeah, this conscience seems to be working at a different level. And I should quote the verse of the Quran that I'm referring to, and it says, "I do, that's God, I do call to witness the self-accusing soul, the conscience, effectively, that the day of judgment is a certainty." So not everybody realizes what that means, but maybe if you reflect on it, basically saying that the self-accusing soul, your conscience, is evidence of um, a day of judgment. So yep, let's see. Let's jump to the next comment of yours. If God exists, my secular Quranism plan will work. And we kind of talked about this already. God is constantly guiding everyone, but if you want, let's say, your secular Quranism, so saying what God will do to prove his existence is not the way to go about it. Like, if you do this, I'll believe in you. You don't boss God around. It's
I
actually,
wasn't really saying that. I was saying, I mean, obviously, I'm saying, okay, I'm saying that this is a thought experiment.
yeah.
That um, if I'm doing the right thing, and I think on the whole I must be doing the right thing by saying that we should live under God's laws, even if people might not agree with my interpretation. I think at least I'm moving in the right direction. Would you agree?
Yeah. So I mean, later on, I'll discuss the fact that it's inevitable that Islam will. I'll give us some sort of logical. Oh, you know what? I don't want to be a liar. I said something I would do, and I said I'd go through the comments. Let's whiz through the comments, even if they're insults. Here we go. Sorry about that. Crow Claw. I'm sorry about that insult. Anyway, and Khalid Safir. How comes I got my name? I thought you don't like me either. With actual evidence. Yep, I hope you've noticed I've been giving lots of evidence. Alika's in the past when I did live streams all the time, Alika was always there to tell me I was wrong. So cool. And I don't mind. Thank you. Sometimes you say things that are helpful. So Claire now affirms that she believes in God. Yes, she does. Yes, it's she is that right, Claire? You confirm, yeah. By her own admission, if there is a creation, the world, basically, there must be a creator. Yeah, she does. It's official. Is that official, Claire?
Well, I'm happy to make the inference, but there are people who say things like, um, yes, there was a recent one on a Twitter exchange, in fact. So there was this atheist who said the universe is always going through a big bang, and then there's a big crunch, and then there's a big bang, and there's a big crunch. So not a big deal, because that's how the universe is.
Oh, that's a really weak argument. It's just basically it's trying to confuse people. It's like, oh, it's just a explosion, then it got together. No, it wasn't just an explosion. It was a very precise explosion, and there's a world and a universe. I mean, sorry, an Earth that came about with amazing life support systems, incredible life support systems, and a million other things. And it wasn't just a balloon popping sort of thing. So that's just silly, I think. But anyway, and then Alika says, no, she converted to secular Quranist hypocrites. So yes, I would say I would agree to some extent. Yes, you converted to secular Quranist, and I was going to say later on, people will say that if you don't become a full-blown Muslim, they might call you effectively a hypocrite because you're like saying follow this, but you're not following it completely. What do you think? What do you say to that?
Well, I maintain my position of agnosticism because I'm conscious that most Westerners are atheists, and I'm saying really that the um, the laws of God have benefits even for atheists, because atheists also benefit from having a stable society, a stable economy, and all the kinds of laws that the Quran has that make moral, political, and social sense.
Yeah,
So
so
even
I
if you
can.
don't believe in God, these laws on their own merits make sense.
Yeah, that's true. So I can see that God could be using you and using people like Andrew Tate, who started off not as a Muslim, and then that process made it more convincing that he did convert to Islam and things like that. So people can go, "Oh, I'm not a Muslim at the moment. Maybe I will convert like he did." I'll go through that same process. So there could be all sorts of things that God is doing to make it more easy for people to become Muslim. So that's possible, yeah. What's this other longer comment? She is no convert. Everything's about you. What about me? She has made up her own fantasy, but just a few moments ago, she acknowledged one should be able to naturally induce that God exists. That's true. Let's just move on. Shall we move on? What do you think? Are you right? Do you want to respond to
No,
that?
no.
This is all about you.
William is just following me around. I know
Oh,
him well.
really?
I've had a few discussions with him, and he basically disapproves of secular Quranism because I'm not Muslim, and he
Oh.
disagrees with my interpretation. But then, he's a Sunni who doesn't think that anybody who's not a Muslim Islamic scholar has any right to say anything at all about
Oh.
anything.
Oh, is that true, William? Okay. William, was it? Is that William?
Yes.
Do you say, okay, she affirms it because she knows it's true, but then clings to claiming to being a. Yeah, I agree with you, William. She needs to let go of that agnosticism. It's old news, old fashioned. It'll be so out of fashion soon,
I
it'll be
have to stay
pointless.
with the people who are mostly agnostic because I think it's a more eloquent
William,
message.
pray for her. It will happen. Just give it time. I agree with you. Just keep hounding her like you are. Okay, just a continuation of her juvenile way of thinking. I do agree. I have to agree. I think atheism and agnosticism, which is an excuse for being an atheist, all the agnostics that I've talked to basically. I mean, you're halfway, but most of the agnostics I speak to or I debate, they're basically just atheists. They never give an argument for existence of God. And I do think it's a juvenile way without just being insulting, but it's actually something that really holds you back in terms of your thinking. Like it should be like there should be a real. I think I was an atheist earlier on when I was in my early 20s or whatever. And I
Mhm.
was like, and then I basically fell for certain ideas, the stupid ideas, which is like, oh, anything's possible. So maybe God can, possible. And you kind of should get over that, I think. She is smarter than Khaled. Oh, what? This is my one
Finally, a comment
mention.
about you.
She remembered me, but anyway, no mind. She knows there is no Allah. But we talked about this, Alika. Jesus used to say Allah. Anyway, no mind. But maybe you forgot about that thing. You don't remember everything I say. She's smart. Oh, I thought I was on the next one. Next one here. Khaled, I want a happiness course for slaves Muslims. Sorry. So she's just trying to insult Islam because Islam didn't outrightly say slavery is not allowed. But of course, the Bible says you can kill slaves as long as it takes longer than 2 days. Maybe you bleed them to death. So she knows that. I think we've talked about that before. So I don't know why she's picking on slavery when it comes to, because she's a Christian, by the way. I have to introduce my what do they call it? My trolls. You introduce your troll. So Allah was one among many gods worshipped by Quraysh. Not really. They realized that Allah was the one God of all the gods, let's say, in their mindset. Anyway, and Allah means the God, so you can't be one of the many gods. When they got a hunch of Judaism, they converted to monotheism. Maybe, who knows? if conversion keeps going like this, she will become an Ahmadi Muslim eventually, inshallah. That's right. Thank you. You're correct, inshallah. It's the most reasonable. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think, Claire? Do you think so? Ahmadi Muslims believe in things like Prophet Muhammad not flying around, and I don't know. I mean, yeah, and other Muslims believe in all sorts of weird things like Prophet Jesus, flew to heaven or flew to God, even though God is everywhere and hanging around for 2,000 years. Yet he's not superhuman, or God can do anything, make pigs fly. But Ahmadi Muslims don't believe in that kind of stuff. So, I mean, maybe it's a bit unfair, but I'm asking you, but like, do you think Ahmadi Muslim idea of Islam is more realistic than the other Muslims?
Well, it seems that your imams are more learned because you actually learn about other religions, and your training period is 7 years or something, isn't it?
Yeah, we've got universities and things like that. Yeah. Yeah. But do you think, like, besides the fact that we learn longer, do you think, I mean, from the little you know of our ideology, I mean, do you know some of the mysteries? Like Christians say it's a mystery, the three in one, three gods in one's a mystery. But Muslims say that kind of stuff as well. They say God can do anything, even if it sounds crazy and you've never ever seen any evidence of it, like Prophet Muhammad flying and Jesus flying and things like that, even though actually the Quran is very clear that didn't happen. But Ahmadi Muslims don't say that. So I'm just saying, don't you find the Ahmadi, I'm not going to say it one more time because I feel like I do repeat things and then the stream goes well beyond the limit, but do you not find that maybe to a rational person that the Ahmadiyya Muslim understanding of Islam is a bit easier to believe?
I'm actually not very clear about a lot of your beliefs. I just assume that your beliefs are roughly the same as other Muslims, but you have some issue with you the Prophet.
Oh, okay, cool. So maybe in
That's all
future
I mean.
videos we'll talk about the differences. Although I talked about some of the differences,
But
but anyway,
you
yeah.
did last time, I think, but I
Yeah, we
not
just
have
don't
the
believe
term
in
quite
pigs
right.
flying and stuff like that. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the essential difference. She's become a Christian. No, don't do that, Claire. How does Alika know you're becoming a Christian?
I think it was on my mention of the New Testament a bit
Oh,
earlier.
is that what it is? Okay,
I think so.
maybe
About
the leaker's right. Who knows? I see the audiences sufficiently reflects those on the show. Interesting. Okay. Hey, good evening or good evening back to you, our Christian Muslim friend. He's halfway to Islam as well. He's a Christian who believes in Prophet Muhammad. Yeah, but he's hanging on to that cross. He loves his crosses. He'll get over it. Will you get over it, George? Anyway.
oh yes, hello George. I think I know. Yes,
Yeah, you
yes,
live stream with him as well. Very
yes.
smart guy. Okay, so now that's that done. Let's try to uh we've got about 5 minutes before it's 1 hour, so we're definitely going to go over the limit as usual. So anyway, this is Claire again. I am behaving and we've covered a lot of this anyway, so maybe we'll skip this. I am behaving as if God exists while adhering to my identity as an agnostic. Okay, so um behaving well. So first of all, yep, sure, behaving well is good for you. Good actions have good results. So what I mean is, like, sure, by behaving as God exists means you're following God's laws and those are healthy for you, so there's some benefit in there. And there's a verse of the Quran that says if you do good, you do good as defined by God, you do good for your own souls, and if you do evil, you do it to yourself, basically do bad to yourself. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's true. um but the problem is, besides this benefit of following God's laws, um believing is what gives you conviction to do the thing. So, for example, Jordan Peterson has talked about how to quit alcoholism, and Islam must be the most powerful force in stopping people drinking from alcohol, just in terms of converts and things like that, and general practices. And he said, from the psychological evidence, people who don't know Jordan Peterson, I'll be surprised if you don't, he's a very famous psychologist. He said the evidence is that the most powerful effect or way to overcome alcoholism is a spiritual experience. And even if you look at the 12, not the 12 rules of life for what's it called, Jordan Peterson, but the Alcoholics Anonymous, I think there's 12 or 13 steps, I think. Those are spiritual steps, including believing in a higher being. Have you ever heard about
12 steps,
alcoholics?
I think.
12 steps, is
12
it?
steps,
Okay,
yeah.
right. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, do you know anything about the 12 steps and
Well,
the kind of
it's an
belief in
AA
God
thing
being
about
part
what
of
they
it?
mustn't do, basically.
Yeah, and it's very spiritual. Like one of it is giving up to a higher power that will help you. Those are one of.
Well, it's sort of like, well, if you'd been Muslim, then you wouldn't have your drink problem, would you?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that when you say you're acting as if you're behaving as if God exists, that's not very convincing. You're kind of saying, yeah, I'm pretending God exists, but I kind of don't. I know God doesn't really exist, right? But the thing is, the reason why Islam is so powerful is based on the awareness that God exists. Yeah. So basically, you're really not going to be effective in your actions. You're not going to have much conviction without that. What do you think about that?
I think people do think I'm acting with conviction. I've been doing the same
Cool.
thing.
So, I mean, the benefits of Islam are things like fasting. Have you ever done the Ramadan fast for 30 days?
No, but I did do a fast for Yom Kippur.
Okay, cool. So you're getting there, but if you believed in God, I think you'd be able to do it. That's my point. Yeah. Oh yeah, conviction is really powerful as well. Like in terms of removing your depression, feeling like a loser. Sounds very strange thing to say, but I call the sense of depression feeling like you're a loser. And the reason why I use those words is a great verse of the Holy Quran that essentially, surely man is in a state of loss, except those who believe and do good deeds, encourage each other to accept truth and encourage each other to be steadfast. So it's talking about the different levels of conviction. One is the most basic level is actually having some belief, and then there's acting on it, and then there's other levels like telling other people about it. But without that basic belief, you'll feel lost. And I should rewind and go back to psychologists to effectively say that. So is Viktor Frankl. He talks about happiness comes from meaning, and meaning is basically a belief in a purpose. So you need a belief, not like, oh, I'm pretending to believe sort of thing. Nietzsche and Frankl combined their sort of words, and Frankl basically paraphrased Nietzsche and said, a person with a why can overcome any how. Things like that. So basically what I'm trying to say is there's really no substitute for truly believing God exists, because that will massively impact everything you do, all your convictions, your self-identity, you will feel depressed unless you truly believe in God. So what do you think about that?
Yes, you will be downhearted. I suppose belief in God makes you accept your lot in life, and you think, well, it's probably for the best, even though I suffer, and maybe some good will come out of it, as long as I'm doing the right thing and not, going against God's laws. It gives you the resignation to accept suffering, and also gives you the conviction to challenge evil.
And that's right. It makes you far more powerful and patient, and with a longer view of fixing a problem. Everybody else falls apart quite quickly, but Muslims don't. But I would only tweak what you said. There's not really suffering if you're a Muslim. So there's pain and there's suffering. There's pain, the physical effect of, you know, just being pricked or whatever, or losing somebody. But suffering is a negative way of looking at that. So if you see everything is purposely designed, that's what the Quran also says, that everything is I always forget the exact words, but there is nothing that is, I'm paraphrasing because even though it's really short and I've said it 100 times, I always forget it. But there's nothing that ever happens to you beyond your. There's nothing beyond the capacity of any soul. So everything that happens
God
to
will
you.
not burden a soul with more than it can bear. Is that
Thank you very much. Exactly. Perfect. Yes. See, almost Muslim. Just you're getting there. So yeah, so everything's designed, and so there's no suffering because it's planned for you. It's not like an impossible exam. You've been prepped for it up to that point in your life and things like that, and you become more and more aware of that as well. Even though it seemed really difficult. Anyway, I have to be agnostic in order to make the point that you. So you said this already, that if you're agnostic, then the general populace will go, "Oh, she believes in following Islam. Maybe we will." So, problem with that is, oh, I use the same word as a leaker. Oh my gosh. Here we go. So I said, your hypocrisy in promoting yet not accepting Islam will show. Do you want to respond to that?
I'm just saying that repeating what I said earlier, that theocracy has benefits for atheists if they value stable marriages, stable families, stable society, stable economy, and a stable international order. So these are the benefits of a theocracy for atheists.
Okay.
They can't say, "Oh, we don't care about crime or war or the economy," because it affects them too.
Yeah. So yeah, that's in some way a reasonable answer, but that's assuming people are logical, and people tend to do really stupid things, even though this is what surprises me actually. It's like we're in a very, especially in the West, we're very high tech, and we're surrounded by science and logic and things, but we do completely stupid things like drink alcohol. So it seems that we don't use our intelligence until we believe in God. It's sort of the missing link. We have the intelligence, we've got the science, but we don't use it. So what you're saying seems right, but in practice, I don't think it really is. Anyway, God does not. So my next point would be, God does not need your help. You need God's help. So I wouldn't be concerned about staying agnostic for the sake of the general populace, so they're convinced. They'll come over anyway. And so how will you know that they're going to come over anyway? Islam's success is inevitable. Why? Because truth has come and falsehood has vanished away. And so again, any translation of the Quran, any short translation of the Quran is usually inadequate. So what I put in the brackets is the meaning of the words are more well explained. It's like the truth weakens falsehood. And that kind of makes sense. Like even from a psychological point of view, they'll tell you that falsehood, first of all, is very hard to maintain. If you tell a lie, it's really hard to maintain because you have to maintain lots of stories around it. And so the truth naturally
what a
breaks.
tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, so it's very hard, easy. It's inevitable that the truth in Islam, we can see it's the truth because it's scientific, it's logical. Nobody's ever faulted any of its teachings. It's always way ahead of its time, etc. Will break the falsehood, which is another verse of the Holy Quran. So it's inevitable, common sense, if you believe pigs fly, then Islam will break that idea because they don't, and we can easily just prove these kind of things. So anyway, here we go. What's this next point? I am saying Christians are really atheists pretending to be idolaters. Alika, you might have something to say about that. Probably many people claiming to be Jews and Muslims are also atheists and therefore hypocrites. People pretend to believe in God because claiming you believe in God makes people trust you. So my answer is no, Muslims are followed because their beliefs work, like family values. So people don't follow Muslims, or maybe they follow Christians for that reason. But at least in Islam, it's like, it's not just because I'm saying I'm a Muslim, I believe in God, and okay, oh, he sounds trustworthy. No, what I'm saying makes sense. What Muslims are saying makes sense, which is why so many people are convinced of it. It's not because of a simple claim they're making to believe in God. So I think what your statement is saying doesn't hold for Muslims. Maybe it holds for some other religions. I don't know.
Well, because the idea, there used to be a time when if you said you were atheist, people just wouldn't trust you because they think, well, you lie, you cheat, you'd steal, you'd murder if you thought you could get away with it. So we won't trust you because you don't believe in God or the afterlife. So you don't believe that you'll get punished in the afterlife if you do evil, or rewarded in the afterlife if you do good.
Okay. I mean, that's in the past, isn't it? I think it might even be the other way around at some point nowadays. If you believe in God, they'll go, oh, this guy's crazy, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, but that's even changing. What's this? Even if God does not exist, the laws of God matter because just trying to follow them or pretending to follow them, interesting, has kept Jews in existence since Mosaic times. What was my response? Following them is good for yourself. And the thing about Jews, I don't know, that they seem to be not doing very well most of the time throughout history. I mean, given that they've been around for so long and there's still like such a small group, they still keep getting obliterated, unfortunately. But and I'd say that's from lack of following their rules, using interest-based systems that they're not supposed to be using on other people. Not a good idea. So the Jew thing, I think that hasn't helped them really. And yeah, what do you think?
Well, people do complain about Jews. I mean, particularly Christians and Muslims, and they say, "Oh, we're their victims. They're so cunning. They keep, exploiting us," and that sort of thing. It seems to be, a recurring theme over the centuries,
Yeah,
and
for
people
good
come up.
reason, I would say. No, I mean there is evidence of this kind of stuff happening. And no, you don't believe that, or you don't want to be banned again. Maybe let's leave that. I don't know. It's up to you.
I'm just explaining,
Oh,
a social and historical phenomenon, rather than saying, that they're necessarily right. I mean, I think it's unhealthy to blame Jews for anything because,
mm.
if you, because really,
Yeah, I
if
agree.
you
You
think,
shouldn't blame people
no,
because you
because
should
there's something wrong
realize.
with your religion
Mm,
if a few Jews can just destroy your civilization, as these anti-Semites keep claiming.
yes. Yeah,
There must be
really
something
true.
wrong with your, religion if it's so easy to subvert.
Yep, that's true. Exactly, I agree. So people are not practicing Islam if they're easily walked over, and so that's kind of evidence of why Western countries walk over and destroy Iraq and so many other countries
Yes,
because
yes.
yeah.
I knew this Muslim who said, "Oh, we Muslims are cursed," and I said, "Oh, that's an interesting view." And he said, "Yes, yes. Oh, we were so successful, and now look at us."
Yeah, you're cursed. They're cursed because they're not following Islam and they're not accepting the promised Messiah. We talk about like the second coming of Jesus coming is so evident. But yeah, so they're not following the
Here's
prophet.
Yes, I mean, here's an analogy, which I kind of want people to understand because I made it very simple. It's sort of like we're the cook, and there's a recipe book. But sometimes we don't follow it, in the same way that we have all these instruction manuals to our electronic equipment that we never read because we can't be bothered. And we waste our time fiddling around with it when all we have to do is open the book, and then we will get the right results. But for some reason, we think we know better. We prefer to just fiddle around with it, or we don't follow the recipe, and the dish is not as good as it could be, or it is terrible. So the solution to that is to follow it next time. It's simple, isn't it? I mean, you don't need.
You would think so,
Yeah.
wouldn't you? But why? Why? Because
They don't want to
humans
admit
are
that they
not.
made mistakes. Not Jews, not Christians, not Muslims. They they did nothing wrong, and
The
it's
human
somebody else
condition, isn't it?
who is to blame.
Yeah, the ego. We don't like to learn from our lesson. We don't like to think we're wrong. That's that ego thing happening. So anyway, so this video is supposed to be about two things: proving God exists and why God matters. And I was looking through your comments, and I don't think there was too much said about why God matters. So I just made a quick list. So I'll start with the mental benefits. So our concept of success in Islam, which is basically oneness with God through good actions, etc., and it's all supported by psychology, gives you happiness unlike human-made ideas of success. So basically, in short, if you follow Islam, one of the benefits is a mental benefit, which is you will feel happier because your idea of success is actually in line with your design. And what do you think about that?
Well, I think with all this transgenderism going around, belief in God is actually very important for you to, accept your lot in life. Because, I mean, I'm sure we all wish that we were, smarter, richer, had more influential and cooler friends, and, all the things that we want that we don't have. And we can just carry on saying, oh, I wish I were a member of the opposite sex. Oh, I wish I was taller. Um, and maybe it's not that healthy to have operations to make us taller, or have operations to help us masquerade as a member of the opposite sex, because it would mean sterilizing ourselves, and then maybe later we'll just get upset at how the terrible things we've done to ourselves that is irreversible, and that will make us commit suicide, and that would be another offense against God that we might have to pay for if there exists an afterlife. So in a way, it's a trap. This sort of I'll just do what I like, because we are so affected by our moods and fashions of thinking that we don't really like the same thing from one time to another, and we often change our own opinions.
Yeah, so we're pretty confused without God, really confused, and that confusion is leading to a lot of self-harm in terms
And
of
a
surgery.
destruction of Western civilization, the way it's going.
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose that's the next benefit I was going to talk about. So you got mental benefits through social needs being met, which some people who are not kind of following the statistics and things might think you can meet your own social needs, but as Western society is demonstrating, people are just becoming more lonely by following their non-God rules. So as we move away from God, we're becoming more depressed and isolated and things like that, and suffering from bad mental health and things like that. Even the transgender thing, one of the roots of it is what they call body image problems. So if you follow the laws of God, but like for especially women suffer from body image issues, and they found through psychological studies that if you cover up, you have where especially if you're women, because women are more self-aware of their bodies. If they cover up more or wear modest clothes, they will have less body image issues. And in a way that's completely obvious, but some people find that sort of sexist for me to say that women care about their parents more. What do you think? Do women care about their parents more than men?
Well, I think men care about women's appearance because they have very um,
Okay, go on, go on, go on, go on.
well, they do, which is why, I suppose you could say that men need to be protected from women by not being, not looking at them because, it will distract them or something if they
Yeah.
see too much flesh on display. And that's fair enough. It's like, well, maybe if I'm trying to give up alcohol, I shouldn't be looking at lots of, advertisements of, alcoholic drinks.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So it's the same thing with, sexualizing society confuses people. Everybody gets confused. Women confuse themselves because they start competing, wearing less and less clothes and things like that. And they objectify themselves as well. It works both ways. So, yeah. And then there's a physical benefit. So the rules set by the creator um, are rules that we cannot even think of, like circumcision. Sound like a crazy idea, but it turned out it works for you. It reduces STDs and things. But
But it's
generally,
not in the Quran, is it?
oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't realize. Um, yeah, so I've learned something.
Mm.
But generally, I mean, it's accepted that it is a teaching. But yeah, that's very interesting. Thanks for telling me about that. But generally, what I'm saying is, like, you really are not going to beat the rules of the creator. Like, you with your, trying to figure your own self out, that's going to take many generations, and we still barely know about ourselves. And you're really just not going to know about what works for you better than God who made you. So, any thoughts about that?
Yes, yes. It just came into my head that if our physical needs are satisfied, the next thing we want in the Maslow's hierarchy of um,
Of needs, yeah,
desires of needs is that we want self fulfillment or whatever the expression is,
yeah.
um, and and a lot of it is to do with identity. So now I mean, it is said that we have identitarian politics, and this seems to me to be really white people suddenly realizing that they have fallen in status to relative to other groups. And well, I mean, a lot of them tend to blame Jews, and then they see all the immigrants and they decide that they hate Muslims the most. But what is why is it happening? I mean, obviously they don't like it, but I would suggest that the reason why their governments are importing all these immigrants for willing cheaper labor is because they're not doing the work. They don't
Yeah.
want to do the work. That's why all these Albanians have to be brought in. And they're complaining, oh, they're being accommodated in hotels and we're homeless. It's sort of like, well, um, if you could be doing the work of these immigrants, I mean, obviously they keep coming because there is work for them to do, and they go and do it. Um, but these anti-immigration parties never tell these disgruntled people what could be wrong, and these people are never interested in issues like education, because
Mm.
most of them are not married, or if they're and if their parents are not married parents, so they don't care about these issues like education and vocational training, and this means that the indigenous people just aren't educated enough
And so
in order to perform the work.
these immigrants, are you saying they're religious? Because I would say probably a lot of them are, like especially the Muslim immigrants. And so, are you making the point just for everybody's sake? So, are you saying by being religious, you'll do better, and the people who are not being religious are falling behind as as we can see with the indigenous Western population, they're falling behind, they're becoming more and more useless, and then they have to be,
But
replaced, as it
basically told
were.
to go and kill
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah, and they're killing themselves. That's how bad it's getting. If people don't know, we're
Yeah, and
not
the
joking.
government actually wants them to go and sterilize themselves and be gay and not to breed.
Interesting. That kind of makes sense. Like if maybe the government's had enough of the Western, maybe I don't know. That's an interesting way of looking at it. This could be a possibility. Yeah, I do wonder why governments are pushing this ideology. Maybe that makes sense. They've just had enough of
I think it's a
Westerners.
part of their population reduction program,
Yeah.
program. So they get all the population from the non-white parts of the world to come here, and then
Hmm.
they too become degenerate
Hmm.
because eventually they'll succumb to the
Oh, they're
culture.
hoping the Muslims will become degenerate as well, coming to the
Yes, and
West.
yes.
Interesting.
And
I
and,
mean,
and then when they're all completely useless, they replace everyone with AI, so they
hmm.
don't have to to negotiate with them at all. But then,
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, the plan is failing a little bit because the Muslims are not necessarily becoming that degenerate. They just keep growing in numbers.
yeah, and the thing is that they don't understand that this technocracy that they think is going to be so wonderful. It's like, well, the technocrats are just going to say, well, you don't know how to repair driverless trains and driverless cars, can
Hmm.
you? Because you're stupid now, and we can we can really exploit you
Hmm.
by demanding, lots of things from you now that you're too stupid to
Hmm.
even drive a car.
Hmm.
You
And
know,
and what will happen is the technocrats won't rule everything by themselves. They still need programmers, and it'll be the Muslims who are the programmers because they are still developing themselves, etc. And they're developing. They're more likely to be developing themselves because there's happier people, because they're from, stable families and things like that. And if you're really unhappy, you basically just become a delinquent, and that's again statistically true. If you don't have a dad at home, you will probably become a criminal. And not a very good
or if you
technocrat or
do have a
programmer.
dad at home and you are going to become a criminal, you will be a more organized criminal.
At least you'd be a better criminal, and you might be further up the pecking order. I mean, it's better than
Yeah,
being
because I mean, all the
bottom.
criminal gangs are not indigenous in the
Oh,
UK.
really? Oh, that's
No, it's
interesting.
like, oh, these. I mean, I can't. I mean, Turkish gangs and
Oh,
whatever. It's
really?
like, but aren't there any indigenous gangs anymore?
Hmm.
No, no, they can't seem to organize themselves. And
Hmm.
and this is the most interesting thing about, I know you know the Rochdale and Rotherham and all those places. And you think, well, what happened? And it's like, well, it just seems that the Muslims are just more organized in running their child prostitution gangs.
Oh,
And
come
you would
on.
have
No.
thought,
Don't.
and
No, no, no. I don't agree with that. So, it's not Muslims who are the biggest. I think from the statistics I've seen, they try to pin Muslims as these, great leaders of prostitute. I don't know,
child
pimps or whatever.
prostitution gangs.
Yeah, but I think what they did is they homed in on one area where there were only Muslims and said, "Hey, look at all the prior child prostitution gangs, and they're all Muslims." So I'm not. I doubt that's actually correct. But anyway,
But I'm
yeah.
sure, before the Muslims arrived, there would be child prostitution gangs, but they would be run by, the local criminal classes.
Hmm.
And I'm saying, for some reason that they're not, or they're being kind of outranked or
Hmm.
something.
Yeah.
Um, but I think part of the problem also is that um, a lot of these girls come from the south, and they get sent up to Rotherham and Rochdale because the care home fees are cheaper or something.
Okay.
And
Interesting.
and, and so there is a lot of low hanging fruit, and they're not properly supervised, and nobody really cares about them. And these
Hmm.
girls are, in a different part of the country, and they don't know anyone. So
Yeah.
um, um,
Yeah. And these are white girls mainly, are they? Because I can imagine, like, if you're from a Muslim family, you're not easily forgotten about. But if you're from
Yeah,
a
because your
broken
mum
family,
wants you home by a certain
yeah,
time, you
exactly.
know.
I mean, if you're from a broken,
If you're a
yeah,
daughter of an unmarried mother, you know,
and you're
yes,
kicked out by the time you're 16 or something.
because you've
I mean,
become
not a
more
paedophile.
interesting to mum's
Yeah.
boyfriend than mum herself.
Yeah. So you could run away, more likely to run away or be forgotten and things like that. Yeah. So I suppose we're sort of summarizing the benefits of accepting God. And one of the physical benefits is that you'll be a better criminal than, yeah, or further up the technocracy, if that's the word, like you'll be a programmer or something rather than just being a slave to the robots and AI. And then the most obvious benefit of accepting God, I call it accepting God because it's like realizing the obvious that God exists, is that you've got the most powerful friend who runs everything anyway, which is our world. So that's got to be a plus. Do you want to say anything as last words as we end this? I mean, I suppose I will. If you say something, then I'll ask you a question to finish it off. Any ending comments?
Yes, I want to say that if you think about the 5 world religions, what they have in common is the fact that they all support marriage and family values. All of them, even though some are better
What are
at
the
this sort of thing.
five? What are the five? Because
Uh,
like Buddhism doesn't seem to. Buddhism is like, yeah, just be good. Is that one of the five? Because it doesn't really support it. It doesn't tell you anything particularly, and it actually gives the worst example. It's like be the highest status being a monk, like the Dalai Lama. Like, yeah, you end up being a pedophile like that. But yeah, but it's it doesn't really. It doesn't really. So is Buddhism is one of the five, the top
yes,
five?
it's one of the 5. So
They don't
that
really teach you to be married. It teaches you not to be married. It's like, yeah, if you're a really good guy, don't get married.
but that was once upon a time a monastic, um, not movement, but a monastic culture in Europe. Because I guess
Mm.
that was where you would go. That was the highest aspiration. If you didn't want to get married, you become a monk or
Mm.
a nun, right?
Yeah.
And then the state would pay for your stuff, and
Mm. But I'm
maybe that was
saying
a way to
if
think.
that's the highest aspiration, then so you've set a goal and the highest aspiration not to get married. And so Islam is the opposite, is there's no situation in which it's good not really any situation when it's good not to be married. So the highest aspiration is to be like Prophet Muhammad, and Prophet Muhammad had lots of wives. So I don't think all religions promote marriage like Islam does. I mean, second place would be Judaism. I mean, maybe even, I say second
Even
place.
Christianity, when they took it all seriously,
Mm,
because of,
yeah. Again,
the
Christianity has monks and things, and that's a high aspiration. So they sending mixed messages. I don't. So yeah, it does in some extent, but it doesn't do it as well as Islam. I would say.
no, it doesn't, because Christianity just doesn't have that official handbook that Muslims do.
Yeah.
Because so what happens is their government just makes up the rules as it goes along, and they're still doing that.
Yeah.
And we are suffering the effects of the legislature, parliament, just making up the rules as they go along. and
Cool.
and and the biggest evil just comes from America, who and they have no official religion, and neither does Russia. And the problem is obvious, because then they'll just sort of use the rules of realpolitik to resolve their conflicts. And it will mean war, and it will mean nuclear war. And we're piggy in the middle in the UK,
So I'm
because
going to
we
stop you there. I'm going to ask you a question. As any good teacher should, and if you don't know, I'm a teacher. We're going to review the lesson and see what you've got from it. What do you think about does God exist?
the concept of God certainly does.
Okay,
And
interesting answer.
it is enough to change people's minds, because there are people who will, at some time in their lives, want to believe that God protects them and will right wrongs.
And does God matter?
Yes, of course it does, because his laws matter.
Cool. We're almost there. We're getting there. Give it a year.
Mm.
All right. Thank you very much, Claire. I'm kind of giving you a hard time a little bit, but I don't think you care.
No, I enjoy these conversations.
Good. Me too. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your time. It's always fun having you. Um, yeah, and you're still teaching me about the Quran as well. Things I don't know. All right. Thank you very much. Peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum,
And the same.
everybody.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Bye. I keep forgetting where the button is.